This is not a drill. Over the past 24 hours, a single vote inside the U.S. House of Representatives pushed American democracy into one of the most dangerous moments it has faced in generations. By a margin so narrow, it is almost impossible to grasp. 218 to 217, Congress approved articles of impeachment against Donald Trump. One vote, one member of Congress, one decision standing between constitutional order and something far more unstable. What matters is not only that the House voted, but the way it happened. There was no overwhelming victory, no bipartisan surge, only a deeply divided chamber split almost evenly while making a decision that cannot be undone. This was not a symbolic message or a political warning. It activated a constitutional process that now moves forward on its own force, no longer guided by intention or restraint. Within minutes of the gavel striking, Trump reacted exactly as his advisors expected and exactly as his instincts dictated. He rejected the vote as a hoax, labeled it a witch hunt, and called it an illegitimate act carried out by enemies of the people. He made his position absolutely clear. He will not resign. Not now, not later, and not under any circumstances. This refusal is not emotional language or empty anger. It is a calculated signal. Trump is telling Congress, the courts, and his supporters that he does not see this moment as a legal process, but as a political conflict. And when politics turns into warfare, the rules change. Even more revealing than Trump's response was what did not happen next. Republican leadership said nothing. There were no immediate statements, no press briefings, no shared talking points. In Washington, silence during a crisis is never accidental. It is deliberate. It signals that those with power are waiting to see which outcome becomes unavoidable before committing themselves. And here is the uncomfortable reality. Once impeachment passes the House, events begin moving on their own. The next 72 hours are not meaningless procedure. They are a pressure zone. Evidence is being sorted. Legal strategies are being finalized. Private conversations, ones the public will never hear, are already shaping what happens next. This moment may feel familiar only if it is misunderstood. This is not 2019. This is not 2021. And it is not Watergate. Trump enters this crisis with tools Nixon never had. He commands a mass political movement, has instant access to tens of millions of supporters, and has built an identity centered on grievance and victimhood. The vote did not resolve anything. It triggered something far more dangerous. From this point forward, the system either proves it can still enforce its own limits, or it reveals in real time that those limits no longer function. If you are waiting for Republican leadership to clearly defend Trump or clearly walk away from him, you will likely wait longer than expected. That delay is not confusion. It is strategy. In moments of genuine political danger, power does not rush to microphones. It retreats behind closed doors. That is exactly what is happening now. The absence of statements from senior Republican figures is the real story. Silence here is a holding pattern while risk is recalculated. Public loyalty to Trump has always been easy. Private loyalty is far more complicated. Many commentators immediately reach for comparisons to Nixon, but that analogy collapses almost as soon as it is examined. Nixon faced an aggressive press, a hostile Congress, and eventually opposition from his own party. Trump faces something far more unstable, a party divided between fear of him and fear of surviving without him. Nixon never had the ability to speak directly to a massive audience in real time. Trump does, and he uses that power aggressively. Social media rewrites accountability. It eliminates distance. It bypasses institutions. It allows Trump to frame every legal step not as law, but as persecution. That power makes traditional enforcement slower, less effective, and more fragile than it was in the 1970s. This is why the Watergate comparison misleads. Nixon's support weakened quietly and then collapsed. Trump's support hardens under pressure. Every accusation becomes evidence of conspiracy. Every investigation becomes confirmation. The political logic is reversed. Republican leaders understand this clearly. They are not debating whether Trump faces legal risk. They are calculating whether opposing him is survivable. The danger is no longer just losing a primary election. It is igniting a civil war inside the party that could last for 10 years. That is why the next phase does not begin with speeches. It begins with numbers. Senate math, electoral math, donor math. Power is being measured in margins, not in principles. What looks like hesitation is actually emergency decision making. Because once this moves to the Senate, the question changes. It is no longer about whether Trump did something wrong. The question becomes far more dangerous. Does the Constitution still have the authority to remove a president who refuses to recognize its limits? That is where the real confrontation begins. To understand how this crisis could actually end, the noise must be stripped away. This is not about politics or rhetoric. It is about mechanisms. Power moves through systems, and the Constitution offers only a few ways to restrain a sitting president. Right now, three options exist, each more destabilizing than the last. The first option is impeachment, which has already occurred and is widely misunderstood. Impeachment does not remove a president. It is a formal charge that sends the case to the Senate for trial. By itself, it changes nothing about who controls power. It simply shifts the battle to a chamber where the margins are unforgiving. Conviction requires 67 senators. That number is not symbolic. It is a barrier. Democrats, even with aligned independents, are nowhere close. Removal would require at least 16 Republican senators to vote against a president from their own party. Historically, that level of defection is extremely rare. Party loyalty has already overridden constitutional duty twice during Trump's presidency. The second option is the 25th Amendment, Section 4. On paper, it appears decisive. If the vice president and a majority of the cabinet declare the president unable to perform his duties, power transfers immediately. But the flaw is severe. The president can challenge the declaration, forcing Congress to vote. To keep him removed, 2/3 of both chambers must agree. That standard is even higher than impeachment. There is also a deeper obstacle. This process requires the president's own appointees, individuals whose careers exist because of him, to turn against him. That is not just political destruction. It is personal ruin. In reality, the 25th Amendment remains a theoretical tool, not a realistic one. That leaves the third option, the one few are willing to discuss openly. Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, known as the Insurrection Clause. It states that anyone who has engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the United States is barred from holding federal office. Unlike impeachment, it does not require a Senate trial. Unlike the 25th Amendment, it does not depend on cabinet cooperation. In constitutional terms, it is self-executing. States such as Colorado and Maine have already attempted to use it. The Supreme Court intervened, not because the clause lacks authority, but because it questioned who has the power to enforce it. If Congress formally invokes Section 3, that uncertainty disappears. This is the nuclear option. It bypasses familiar procedures and moves directly to disqualification. It is straightforward on paper and explosive in reality. Using it would instantly push this crisis beyond politics and into constitutional conflict. That is why it frightens everyone involved. Once that path is taken, there is no precedent to guide what follows. What appears to be a struggle between Congress and Trump is, beneath the surface, a fight over the future of the Republican Party itself. That battle is already underway. For years, the GOP lived with a contradiction it never resolved. Trump delivered power, judges, tax cuts, and deregulation. But he also turned the party into a vehicle centered on one individual. Many Republicans believed they could manage that tension forever. The impeachment vote proved otherwise. The party is now divided into two incompatible camps. On one side is the institutional wing, senators and donors who never fully trusted Trump but accepted him because he won elections and blocked Democratic control. Figures such as Mitt Romney, Susan Collins, and Lisa Murkowski represent a group that still values institutions, precedent, and long-term stability. Their fear is not Trump's anger. It is political irrelevance. On the other side is the MAGA core, lawmakers whose identities are inseparable from Trump himself. For them, loyalty is not a tactic. It is survival. Breaking from Trump means political extinction. Standing with him, even through chaos, feels like the only viable choice. This internal divide is no longer abstract. The impeachment vote forced every Republican in Congress to publicly choose a side. There is no neutral position left. Behind closed doors, an even more destabilizing development is unfolding. Money is shifting or disappearing. Major conservative donor networks that once funded Republican dominance have fallen silent. Silence from billionaires is not passive disagreement. It is a warning. When the financial support stops, patience disappears with it. At the same time, private meetings are increasing rapidly. Multiple sources confirm that a group of Republican senators recently met in a closed-door session with no staff present and no official records kept. The purpose of the meeting was not defense. It was preparation. The central question was what happens if Trump actually faces a Senate trial and evidence emerges that cannot be controlled or dismissed. That question carries weight because subpoenas are already moving forward. Text messages, communications with close associates, and possible coordination with individuals facing federal charges are all part of what is being examined. If those materials surface during a Senate trial, the narrative changes instantly, shifting from a partisan argument to clear criminal exposure. This is the point where hesitation becomes fear. The party understands the scale of the electoral reality. If Republicans tie their future to Trump and lose badly, the GOP risks being shut out of power for an entire generation. If they abandon him too early, the base revolts. There is no painless way out. This is not about unity cracking. This is a party tearing itself apart under the pressure of its own survival instincts. The next phase forces Republicans to confront a question they have avoided for nearly 10 years. What happens if Trump is no longer an asset, but a liability they cannot escape? At this stage, nothing is theoretical. Inside political and legal strategy rooms, the same four outcomes are being analyzed repeatedly. These are not media inventions. They are active contingency plans, and each one carries consequences far beyond Donald Trump alone. Scenario 1 is that Trump survives. This is the simplest outcome on paper and the most dangerous in reality. The Senate conducts a trial, but fewer than 16 Republican senators break ranks. Party loyalty holds. Trump is acquitted for the third time. If that occurs, Trump does not merely continue forward. He emerges stronger. His supporters interpret survival as proof that he cannot be defeated. Every accusation becomes evidence that the system tried and failed to remove him. The 2024 election turns into a referendum not on governing, but on persecution versus resistance. The long-term damage is severe. It creates a precedent that a president is effectively untouchable as long as his party controls enough Senate seats. Accountability becomes optional. Institutions continue to exist on paper, but lose their real power. This is how democratic systems weaken, not through sudden collapse, but through quiet exceptions. Scenario 2 is that Trump falls. This outcome requires something powerful enough to break through the noise, evidence so undeniable that partisan defenses collapse. That could be leaked communications, financial records, or a whistleblower from inside his inner circle. Whatever form it takes, it must make continued loyalty more dangerous than abandonment. If that threshold is crossed, Republican senators will not suddenly become brave. They will become pragmatic. Once voters turn, party loyalty dissolves. This is how Richard Nixon's presidency actually ended. Not with the Watergate break-in, but when Republican leaders privately told him removal was unavoidable. History does not repeat perfectly, but patterns remain. When protection becomes a liability, power pulls away. Scenario 3 is a constitutional crisis. This is the outcome no one wants to discuss publicly, but many fear privately. Trump is convicted and removed by the Senate, and he refuses to accept the decision. He declares the trial illegitimate. He claims the vote was rigged. He insists that he remains the rightful president. At that point, the question becomes terrifyingly direct. Who enforces the removal? The Secret Service, federal law enforcement, or the military? The Constitution provides authority, but authority means nothing without compliance. The country would enter territory with no clear precedent to guide it safely forward. A version of this logic has already been seen once before. This time, the stakes are significantly higher. Scenario 4 is the quiet exit arranged behind closed doors. This is the scenario many insiders believe is gaining momentum. There are no cameras and no public statements. Senior Republican leaders meet Trump privately and present an offer. Resign voluntarily, avoid a Senate conviction, preserve the appearance of control, and receive a federal pardon. This is not speculation. It is historical precedent. In 1974, Richard Nixon resigned. 1 month later, Gerald Ford pardoned him. The agreement was never officially confirmed, but it shaped everything that followed. Trump's legal team understands the danger of a public Senate trial. Evidence does not remain contained. Once it enters the official record, it takes on its own momentum. A negotiated exit may be the only way to stop that chain reaction. Each of these scenarios is possible. None of them are clean. Every path forward imposes a cost not only on Trump, but on the system designed to restrain him. This is where the illusion of control finally collapses. Even if Trump survives a Senate trial or avoids one entirely through resignation, his legal exposure does not disappear. In many ways, it intensifies. The most serious threats he faces are not federal. They are state-level prosecutions, and no presidential pardon can reach them. This is the mistake many of Trump's defenders continue to make. They speak as if impeachment is the entire battle. It is not. It is only the visible surface. Beneath it exists a network of criminal investigations that operate outside Washington's political negotiations. In New York, prosecutors have compiled extensive financial records pointing to potential bank fraud, tax evasion, and falsification of business documents. These cases rely on documentation rather than testimony, and documentation does not forget. In Georgia, there is recorded evidence of Trump pressuring state officials to find votes. That recording alone eliminates plausible deniability. These cases move slowly, but they move steadily. Unlike Congress, they are not restrained by party loyalty or election fears. A federal pardon can eliminate federal charges. It cannot erase state indictments. It cannot stop a grand jury. It cannot overrule a judge. This reality is already shaping private discussions. Trump's legal team understands that a public Senate trial is not only a political threat, it is a discovery disaster. Evidence introduced under oath becomes permanent public record. Testimony creates new legal risks. A single mistake can trigger cascading consequences across multiple jurisdictions. That is why resignation, even without immunity, begins to look appealing. Not because it saves Trump, but because it reduces the scope of the conflict. It exchanges one massive front for several smaller, more controllable ones. But there is a trap. The more Trump escalates publicly, the harder it becomes to negotiate privately. Every defiant statement, every inflammatory speech, every claim of illegitimacy raises the cost of compromise. Escalation is not rewarded forever. Eventually, the choices narrow to one question. Does Trump choose political martyrdom or legal survival? That decision is being forced much faster than he anticipated. What happens next in Washington will not remain confined there. This crisis is being closely watched by every major global power, and its effects are already spreading outward. Behind closed doors, American allies are deeply concerned. NATO leaders are asking questions they have not needed to ask in generations. If the United States cannot enforce accountability at the highest level of its own government, what does that mean for the reliability of its commitments overseas? Alliances are built on credibility, not speeches, and credibility erodes faster than it can be rebuilt. At the same time, adversaries are observing this moment with careful interest. Authoritarian leaders do not see disorder. They see opportunity. Every day the United States is consumed by internal conflict is a day rivals can advance their goals without resistance. Distraction is a strategic weakness, and it is being exploited. Financial markets are reacting accordingly. Volatility is not driven by emotion. It is driven by expectation. Investors move when they sense instability in the rules that govern power. Sudden shifts in traditional markets, increased interest in alternative assets, and rising demand for safe havens are signals, not background noise. Confidence in American stability is no longer automatic. It is being tested. The most dangerous consequence, however, is not immediate. It is structural. If Trump survives this confrontation or destroys the system while fighting it, the message to the world is clear. Institutions bend to strong individuals. Accountability is optional when loyalty is strong enough. That lesson does not remain within one nation. It spreads to democracies already under pressure. The global order built after 1945 depends on a fragile assumption that democratic systems correct themselves before they fail. If that assumption collapses here, everything built upon it begins to fracture. Trade systems, security alliances, and human rights standards all weaken together. This is the moment now unfolding. It is not just a presidency at risk. It is the credibility of a system that has endured for centuries. The House vote has already happened. Time is moving forward. Negotiations are taking place in rooms the public will never enter, and the outcome is still uncertain. That leaves one final question hanging over everything. Are we witnessing the collapse of the oldest modern democracy, or the last moment it proves it can still protect itself?